Alright, y'all, we're a couple weeks down the line, and of course, we are on the doorstep of the year's third major at Wimbledon. This, of course, means we have a draw to unpack, and I will get to that, but before that, just commenting on some of the action we've seen in grass court season thus far in the tune-ups. And going off that, I don't think I can remember a year where I felt many of the big names and top guys have been more vulnerable heading into Wimbledon. Obviously, this doesn't apply to the one name in Novak Djokovic, who has turned this tournament into the Djokovic Invitational in recent years. But for just about everybody else, whether it's issues with inexperience on grass or struggling for form at the moment, or it just being well established at this point that grass is not a good fit with certain guys. And, whatever the case, whatever you want to chalk it up to, there's just not been very many guys heading into this grass court season with all too much momentum on grass. Most of the guys that have been more convincing in tune-ups have been, more niche grass court players that, for the most part, you wouldn't necessarily consider to be top-flight contenders. But we'll get into all of that, more specifics regarding certain players and their particular cases as we unload this draw. And segueing right into the bracket, we've got the top quarter, the Carlos Alcaraz Quarter. When this draw was first revealed, a lot of people were quick to point out that Carlos Alcaraz has quite the tricky path in making it deep in this tournament. I would tend to agree. There's quite a few stumbling blocks, really, from first week itself. And, there's still some degree of inexperience for Alcaraz on grass. After all, this will be his fourth tournament on the surface. But to me, I think that his exploits in Queens in the tune-up definitely ease some of those concerns, at least to some degree. Obviously, you do not make it to where Alcaraz has and achieved what he has at his age without being a quick learner, and I think that was on full display throughout his title run in Queens. Squeaked through his opener and then just got better and better and better. And in doing so, I think a lot of encouraging signs for how his game can translate to grass. Obviously, on paper, with how well he moves, as well as, just how aggressive-minded he is, there's certainly some tools that would lend themselves to translating well on grass. And as the week went on, I was really impressed with, for one, Alcaraz looked visibly much more comfortable moving. His footing seemed like it got a whole lot better. And then, he was really utilizing his slice backhand really well. I remember during his semi, there was a graphic on the Tennis TV broadcast with him slicing, I believe, something like 45-46% of his backhands versus just 13 to 15% at Roland Garros. Really smart play for him, considering, slice lends itself to success on grass if it's hit well, with, a grass court being slicker and bouncing lower. And then finally, I noticed he was definitely committing to hitting those bomb flat mid 130 serves a lot more in Queens than he typically does. And it worked really, really well for him. And if he can replicate that type of serving, naturally that's going to make things easier for him on grass. And, with what I saw in Queens, that's why I do feel pretty comfortable with Alcaraz this tournament in spite of his draw. Success in Queens, obviously no guarantee of a deep Wimbledon run, especially with Alcaraz not having defeated anyone really, top 10 caliber. But nonetheless, still guys that on their day have definitely shown to be formidable on grass in De Minaur, Dimitrov, and Korda. And he did so pretty straightforward. But as far as his path is concerned, obviously this section also includes seeds in Nicolas Jarry, Zverev, Alex De Minaur, Francis Tiafoe, Alejandro Davidovich Fokina, and Holger Rune. And really from the second round on, Alcaraz is going to get some opponents that will definitely pose some threats on this surface. And honestly, that goes for pretty much any high seed. There's quite a few guys in this section that aren't seeded even that have the potential to cause some upsets. Notably, you've got Matteo Berrettini, who's struggled all year with health. but over the last couple grass court seasons, it's definitely proven to be one of the most elite players on the surface. 2 titles last year, won a title in 2019, I believe, and obviously 2 years ago, the finalist here. Tough opener for him with Lorenzo Sonego out of the gates, especially with Mateo short on match play and confidence. For Carlos Alcaraz himself, there's potential that he could face, in a rematch of his difficult opener in Queens, Arthur Rinderknech, who in Queens he edged out in a deciding set tiebreak, but he could get him second round. It's another floater guy that could be dangerous and has had a pretty decent grass court season to this point. Then third round for Alcaraz, you have potential of Yari, who's his predicted matchup by seeds, or former Halle champion in Ugo Humbert. These are guys that are streaky, but, those are the exact type of guys you don't want to see early in the tournament, especially when the court plays slicker. It sets up for a lot of those big servers, big hitters to do most of their damage. So as I alluded to earlier, obviously that indicates Alcaraz is probably going to have to be sharp out of the gates pretty much in this tournament. In that same vein, elsewhere you've got some more hyper-aggressive big server, big hitter molds in Alexei Popyrin and Ilya Ivashka. Popyrin, I believe, gets Tiafoe second round, and then Ivashka could get Dimitrov second round. Both of whom being seeds, I'm pretty high on this tournament. Tiafoe, of course, taking out the title in Stuttgart, has kept his career year going. He's yet to have a big major showing yet this year, but that is kind of misleading. I thought he played pretty well in both his losses to Khachanov and Zverev at the Aussie and then the French respectively. Here I think he has a great shot to go deep, at least make the second week. Ever since the US Open last year, really, he's been a different player. His consistency has been night and day to what it was before that tournament. And with his courtcraft and power, I really fancy his chances of putting up his best Wimbledon result of his career yet. As for Dimitrov, I think given the stage in his career he's at, he can be really satisfied with what he's done this year. It's been a real nice bounce-back year relative to the ones he's had, really going back to his best season in 2017. Obviously a former semifinalist here. He has pedigree on this surface. Admittedly, I haven't seen much from him this grass court season outside of Queens, but I did think he played really well against Alcaraz in the quarters there. Obviously, there's potential of him and Francis facing off in the third round, I believe. To me, I think that'll be a really big match in determining who makes it to the quarterfinals in that 8th. And then for Holger Rune's portion of this quarter, Holger also quite inexperienced on this surface at this point. To me, in Queens, it seemed like he got a bit better from what he looked last year. But obviously, there's still also the endurance concerns with Holger, and we're back on best of 5. Albeit, this is the slam where that probably matters the least. But nonetheless, just from the last major he played in, those concerns do still loom large over him in best of 5. Still, though, I think that Holger has a pretty decent path in such a loaded section to making the second week, a potential round of 16. In spite of upsetting Hubi Hurkacz in the first round last year, Alejandro Davidovich Fokina doesn't really move me on grass to this point. That's who Holger could get third round. For him, maybe Zhizhen Zhang might be the toughest out in the first week. He's been a bit of a giant killer in recent months. Bodek van de Zandschulp has been in a downward spiral since blowing that match in Munich to Holger Rune. Albeit he did make the 4th round last year, but he seems to be really reeling at the moment. So, as far as Holger's concerned, I'm not the most confident in him, but also the path that's ahead of him, I'm hard-pressed to pick against him making the second week. Speaking of the second week, actually, Alcaraz, I have neglected to mention, could potentially get Alexander Zverev there, or Alex de Minaur, who he defeated in Queens in the final. Zverev making the semis at Roland Garros really can be an inflection point for his year to this point. Tremendous effort to get back there. And now he's pretty much just playing with house money, no points to defend for the rest of the year. Didn't put in a bad showing in Halle in his one stint of grass court action. But all in all, Zverev has never been great on grass. Of his contemporaries, he probably is the best. I think he's made the Halle final and lost some close 5-setters in the 4th round of Wimbledon multiple times, but still not the greatest on this surface. And additionally, while he is definitely improving while on the comeback trail, I don't think he's in particularly excellent form to say that he's going to pose nearly the same threat that he would on harder clay. That being said, I probably would back him over Demon to make the 4th round, but those are my thoughts on him, and ultimately my quarterfinal pick is going to be Alcaraz over Tiafoe. As I said before, really loved what I saw out of Alcaraz in Queens, really seemed committed to using his variety more, and that will serve him very well on grass, at least it should on paper. As for the Tiafoe pick, as I said earlier, I think that he is primed for a big run in a slam in at least one of these next 2 majors. He's shown flashes on grass before, straight setting Tsitsipas in 2021. Obviously coming off a title himself in Stuttgart. And even in this potential quarterfinal, he should pose quite the threat. But I still expect Alcaraz to come out of this quarter in spite of the potential roadblocks that he might face really early on. Alcaraz has been uber consistent this year. Obviously some bad luck with the body in slams so far this year, but we're at the midway point now this year, and he's got 5 titles, 8 semifinal or better results in 9 tournament appearances this year. I think that lends itself to trusting him to navigate this draw and find his way to the semis. Sheesh, that was long. I promise the rest of the quarters won't be that long. That was just the most stacked of the bunch. Moving on to Daniil Medvedev's quarter. This one's definitely going to be a doozy to predict. You've got other seeds in Talon Griekspoor, Francisco Cerundolo, Tommy Paul, Cam Norrie, Sebastian Korda, Ben Shelton, and Stefanos Tsitsipas. And some other notable names on grass include Adrian Manarino, Marton Fucsovics, Milos Raonic, Chris Eubanks, Jerry Vesely, and of course 2-time champion Andy Murray. Starting with Daniil Medvedev, as spectacular a season as it has been outside the slams, it's been equally underwhelming so far in them. I think there is a chance to reverse those fortunes in slams here, but also, I've never really understood Medvedev on grass because I think that he should be quite a bit better on the surface than he has shown. A lot of the tools he has, and obviously being such an excellent mover, terrific server, and having flat ground strokes that are aided by a lower bounce, those would cater to more success on grass. And he has had some flashes, 2 finals last year, and I believe he's made the 4th round at least once, maybe twice in 2019 too. Obviously there are also factors like him not having a reliable 1-2 punch to shorten points with, or, having a return position that probably most hurts him on the surface that also aren't the best suited to grass. And so with all that considered, Medvedev becomes a bit of a Pandora's box this tournament, where I don't really know what to expect. I do think it helps his cause that Adrian Manarino has played a lot of tennis over the last couple weeks. Just made the final that he played today in Mallorca, and Manarino, who beat Medvedev earlier this grass court season, has been a bit of a thorn in the side for him. Daniil could face him second round, and Manarino knows his way around a grass court. Even at 35, he was playing some of the best ball of his career this grass court season, but at 35, I don't know if he'll have the legs to go take Medvedev on best of 5 now on a pretty short turnaround. Things don't really get much easier for him, though. Talon Griekspoor has a really complete game for this surface, and really productive grass court season out of him, taking out the title in Schertagenbosch, as well as doing well in Halle. And then even further down the road in the 4th round, Medvedev could potentially get one of the 2 guys that contested the final in Eastbourne today between Tommy Paul and Francisco Cerundolo. Cerundolo, obviously the one who ended up taking out the title. He's been quietly excellent this season. Almost made the quarters at Roland Garros. Obviously grass title today, and even last year showed flashes on the surface, pushing Rafa Nadal pretty hard in the first round at Wimbledon. Flip side, Tommy Paul, a guy who started the year so well. Tailed off on clay, but you expect that to change on grass. Did much better in his showings throughout the tune-ups. Issue with him is that he sustained an injury during the final today midway through. Really limited his mobility, so we'll see how that may impact him during Wimbledon. But elsewhere in this quarter, you've definitely got to have Stefanos Tsitsipas on upset alert. Even for him, having had a pretty poor grass court record at this point, this one has been absolutely dismal. I think he ended the grass court season 1-3. The one match he won was from a set and a break down. And in Mallorca, before the match that he lost against Hanfmann, it seemed like he had some wrist issues. He struggled physically with the body since that Australian Open final run. And I think there's a really good shot for Andy Murray here to pull off the upset on him in the second round. Team in the first round is going to be highly billed, but Dominic didn't like grass at all when he was at his best. I still see Tsitsipas being able to get through that. But for Andy Murray, I know since having the hip resurfacing surgery, he has eyed Wimbledon as an event he still believes he can go very deep at. And I think this year is a great opportunity to do just that. Last year was as well. He was playing excellently early on in the grass court season, making the final of Stuttgart before injury kind of derailed that momentum. But this year again, he's put himself in great position. 2 challenger titles on grass. And while I don't think that makes him a contender to win this title, given what I saw from him in Australia earlier this year and how he's followed it up this season, I think he definitely can make his way back to the second week. Don't really consider anyone in his section insurmountable for him, but the guy out of that section who I have the highest hopes for are definitely Sebastian Korda. He seems to have gotten right back on track after getting injured after a brilliant early part of the year through the Australian Open. He looked great in Queens, and as he said, he has a great game for grass with just how clean a ball striker he is and his forecourt game. I believe he could face Cam Norrie in the third round, but that's a guy he just beat pretty convincingly in Queens. Which leads me into my quarterfinal pick, which is Korda over Medvedev. There isn't a lot to go off of for Korda this year, but even though it's early, I think it's pretty safe to say that he has a pretty good fit with grass. 2021, he was very close in a fifth set to making the quarterfinals. And with Medvedev, I'm going to roll the dice on him making it through to the quarters, just because other than Mannarino, who I don't anticipate to be fresh, I don't think there's anyone Medvedev can face that can employ that, typical Medvedev playbook, best 3 out of 5 sets, to bamboozle him, coming in a lot, serve volleying, throwing a lot of angles and different spins at him. And I don't think any of those guys, even on grass, are going to have too much luck hitting him off the court. I do, however, think Korda can do that. Did it earlier this year in Australia. And he seems to be coming back into similar form again. So I will take Sebi to make the semifinals. Getting into the bottom half, we will hit the Casper Ruud Quarter. In this quarter, you've got seeds of Jannik Sinner, Dan Evans, Yoshi Nishioka, Taylor Fritz, Borna Coric, Roberto Bautista Agut, Denis Shapovalov, and finally Casper Ruud. Ruud is the highest seed in this quarter, but I think considered by most probably far from the favorite. Casper has made no qualms, making it known that he doesn't really love the grass. He didn't participate in any of the lead-ups, and it's probably much needed. It's been a pretty exhausting season for him. He just had his first real great result of the season, making the finals of the French Open. Doesn't seem like he's really prioritizing Wimbledon, but if he were to do well at Wimbledon, this is the draw to do it in. Not too bad for him in the early going at all. But I think most of the expectations in this quarter are going in the direction of Jannik Sinner. Sinner's year had been so brilliant up through Monte Carlo and Barcelona, and since he picked up the illness, I think it was, in Barcelona, it has kind of come to a standstill. He's been pretty poor since. But to me, I think this is an excellent opportunity for Jannik to get back on track. It is worth noting that Sinner, till last year's Wimbledon, where he played terrific, but outside of that, really before and since, in his grass court lead up this year, he's been kind of mediocre. But still, with how well he played last year, I don't think that's a fluke. And I think there's a great opportunity to piggyback off of that into this year at Wimbledon. The biggest threat for him pre-quarterfinals would be Taylor Fritz, potentially in the fourth round. Taylor, quarterfinalist last year, narrowly losing to Nadal. But Taylor's coming off a pretty underwhelming grass court season himself. And all in all, he really has had a rough go of it in majors since that Wimbledon run last year. There's some context there with, Alexei Popyrin was zoning out of his mind in Australia. And Cerundolo in the third round of Roland Garros, you would have to say, is just the better clay court player. Still been a really solid season for Fritz, but I don't think he has quite the momentum he had at the same time last year. Still, though, he's a guy that, when he's playing well, grass is a good surface for him. And in this quarter, I think potentially a fourth round between him and Sinner could decide who makes it to the semifinals. Of course, all due respect to former semifinalists in RBA and Denis Shapovalov, who are also in this quarter. But to me, in spite of a good showing in Halle, I think RBA this year seems to be showing his age. And I think in spite of doing really well at Wimbledon since 2019, it just feels to me that his best days are behind him. And for Shapovalov, it's been a brutal year for him thus far. Obviously, at any given moment, he could flip the switch and get hot. That's pretty much the only way I could see him making a deep run, and that's not something I'm really willing to gamble on. So I think that this quarter should come down to Jannik Sinner and Taylor Fritz in the fourth round. Forgot to mention, actually, that Fritz will have his hands full in the opening round with Yannick Hanfmann, who has had by far the best season of his career. He's been playing great. That being said, I'll still say Fritz navigates that, and I also will take Fritz over Sinner in the fourth round. And as a quarterfinal prediction, I will take Fritz over RBA. Obviously, I think Taylor is a guy that's really well suited for grass, and with his last couple slam appearances being such early exits, I think that he's due another deep run. Also feel like it might be good for him that he's a bit under the radar. He's talked about how much pressure he's put on himself, and that negatively impacting him in slams, going back to the US Open last year. I think a lot of the same can be said about Sinner, too. He's put a lot of pressure and expectations on his own shoulders, and he's kind of succumbed to that of late. Both guys also not playing their best tennis right now. I'm just leaning Fritz because Sinner's grass court resume outside of last year's Wimbledon kind of leaves something to be desired, but, it's a pick'em, and I'm just taking Fritz off of my gut. And then finally, for the bottommost quarter, the Djokovic Quarter, there's no reason to waste much time here. It's going to be Novak coming out of this quarter. The other seeds include Andrei Rublev, Nick Kyrgios, Alexander Bublik, Felix Auger-Aliassime, Lorenzo Musetti, Hubert Hurkacz, and Thomas Martin Etcheverry. This is going to be Djokovic, so I'm just going to look at this through the Djokovic lens. I don't really see anybody that could test him until Hubie Hurkacz potentially in the fourth round. Young Hubie did give him a match here in 2019, but Hurkacz has been pretty poor this entire season. He hasn't fared that much better on grass either this year. I think best case for him would be getting a set off Novak, but no more. And I don't really even know to who, because Hubie on paper should make it to that fourth round, but the guy being so prone to getting in these battles with guys that he shouldn't have such a hard time beating, it's not really a guarantee he even makes it to the fourth round. Quarterfinals, he would be projected one of Andrei Rublev, Nick Kyrgios, Alexander Bublik, or Felix Auger-Aliassime. As far as Nick and Felix are concerned, both guys have been injured pretty much all year. Felix has played still, Nick only the one match really all year, with that match in Stuttgart where, he looked pretty far off from 100%. And as for Felix, he's had like one good result all year with Indian Wells this year. Otherwise, he just hasn't been able to get healthy this year. And so it's hard to count on either of those guys to just turn it on out of the blue. If they do, if they're on, I think that either guy could give Djokovic a fight in the quarters. But again, I'm not counting on it. Rublev making it there, I think, will be dependent on if those guys in Nick, Bublik, or Felix can make it through their early rounds because, Andre has struggled historically against the big servers on any surface. Good thing for him is before week 2, he would only have to deal with Kyrgios of guys of that mold, and Nick has a really tricky first round with Goffin, who was a set away from the semis last year. Albeit no longer at his best, but still a nightmare first round. Ultimately, I will say Rublev is the one to meet Djokovic in the quarterfinals because I think Felix and Nick, they're too undercooked right now physically. And then Bublik, who just won the title in Halle and showed, what tremendous ball he's capable of playing. I just don't trust him to be focused long enough to navigate what is going to probably be very tricky opening rounds. Really starting with his first round, Mackie McDonald, a former 4th rounder at Wimbledon. That's also just a nightmare first round out of the gates for Bublik. So, all in all, I think Rublev, it sets up nicely for him to avoid a lot of the guys that he's had a stylistic issue against. But ultimately, that sets him up for pretty much the same fate we saw for him in Australia, where it's a situation where Rublev in a quarterfinal has been all too familiar with, being faced with a guy that, he's just overmatched against. So out of this quarter, I'll say it'll be Djokovic over Rublev. Which of course brings us to semifinal matchups of Carlos Alcaraz versus Sebastian Korda and Novak Djokovic versus Taylor Fritz. As far as Alcaraz versus Korda is concerned, I thought that their matchup in Queens was a pretty great showcase of, just why everyone stresses so much on how complete Alcaraz is at such a young age. Because you have what Korda does so well, it's the smooth, easy, effortless power. And while that power might not look as smooth with Alcaraz, he's right there with Korda as far as how much he possesses. And surrounding the brute power, his all-around game is just so much more technically sound and further along than Korda. He's a far superior mover, and also possesses the variety that doesn't just allow Korda to sit there and line drive balls at him. The full package of being able to scramble, maneuver, and of course when the time comes to finish so effectively, that just seems like a package that Alcaraz is so much further along with than Korda at this point. And in their match in Queens, while Korda I felt was a bit untidy, particularly in the second set, that did seem to frustrate him. Now, on the other hand, Korda does have an avenue to tap into where, Alcaraz, as recently as that Morosian match in Rome, particularly when he's not at his best, there is a tendency sometimes to get a bit rattled and start pressing against those pure power guys. And the surface certainly helps from that standpoint for Sebastian Korda. Ultimately, though, I think right now Alcaraz is more further along, more well put together. So I'm going to go Alcaraz over Korda in 4 sets. Which brings us to my second semifinal with Djokovic and Fritz. Obviously, this is a matchup that has been one-way traffic, 6-0 Djokovic. Only time Fritz took a set, he took 2. But that was during that initial ab tear match between Novak and Taylor in Australia in 2021. And I think it's as simple as Taylor being of that, big game mold that the big 3 kept at bay with guys like Berdych, Tsonga, even Berrettini of late. pretty much locking them out of any prospects of Grand Slam glory over the years. And quite frankly, this is a match I don't think Djokovic would even need to be at his best to win in relatively stress-free manner. Their last match at the Tour Finals, Fritz did put up a really good fight, probably should have taken that into a decider. But still, result never in doubt, and I think more of the same here. Djokovic just too much all-around game for Fritz as well. I will say Djokovic over Fritz in 4. Bringing up a final between 1 versus 2 with Djokovic versus Alcaraz. I think it's been very clear to everybody that I view this tournament the same way that most people are this year. Djokovic deserves the benefit of the doubt to be head and shoulders the favorite to take out his 24th major here. I think Alcaraz has done a great job to, in my view, still separate himself by a little bit from the rest of the pack, even on grass. I'm really impressed with how quickly he seems to be learning and putting together a lot of the foundational pieces to succeeding on this surface. As I noted earlier, going to his slice and utilizing his variety a lot more, serve volleying a lot, committing to hitting a big flat first serve, etc., etc. But he'd be going up against somebody that put those pieces together over a decade ago, and who is going to be gunning for his 8th overall and 5th in a row at Wimbledon. And between these two, some of the factors that are nullified on clay that are pro Djokovic are going to be out in full force on grass. And Djokovic's serving advantage was already on display at Roland Garros, probably will be amplified on grass, plus the ability to rush Alcaraz both from the baseline and particularly off return, the greatest return of all time, that certainly will be amplified. That being said, like I did say after their semifinal, I think it was good for Alcaraz to get a match under his belt against a Big Three member at the back end of a slam. I think from a nerve standpoint, he will be ready for the occasion more this time. But ultimately, given these conditions, I think backing Alcaraz to win would be too big of an ask too soon, and Djokovic too good. So I will take Djokovic to beat Alcaraz in 4 in the final, and capture that record-equaling 8th Wimbledon. The guy has not lost on center court since that 2013 final to Andy Murray. Gonna take a monstrous effort to break that streak this year, and I don't see it happening. But yeah, that's all I got for this video. Can't wait to get Wimbledon kicked off, and it should be a super enjoyable fortnight ahead. But if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, it would be much appreciated if you could drop a like, helps the video perform a lot better in YouTube's algorithm, and also subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Thank you all again so much for watching, and of course, I will see y'all in the next one.